Okay.
There you go. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Briar Harvey. This is the Neurodiversity Media Network. Today, we are here with the incredible Sam Fischer, and we are talking about telling stories and changing stories and being our stories and embodying those stories. And it's a lot of work. So today, I think we wanted to talk about how story changes, that where we start isn't where we have to finish, and what we have to do to make those changes.
Yeah, it's funny. We started off in a different story here before we started recording, and I know last week I told, or that was 2 weeks ago.
Two
I
weeks ago.
was Yeah, 2 weeks ago. I was starting with my story, and then you asked me like, where do we find our stories? And I got to think about like, well, we hear them at home. I know I come from a long line of storytellers, and it feels like we're kind of born into a story. Like, this is who you are. This is what you're going to be. Particularly, I always like to tease with a friend of mine that being born a debutante is like the ultimate ABA. I had no idea that I was an autistic person until I was like almost 50 years old, and until I had a coach say, "I'm not going to ask you if you're on the spectrum. I'm going to ask you how far." And I'm like, oh, "Thank you for seeing me." And because so much of the Southern female training here in the United States is literally like that. Like, you get to go this far, you get to be this big, you get to make this much noise. Okay, I get it. And it's kind of like when humans are such miraculous creatures, when you give us an assignment, man, we do it. And but I was the little kid that's like, well, why? Well, why? I'll do this story, but why? And being born a child in the 70s, it was always because I said so. And I'm like, okay, but why are you saying so? Much to every adult around me's chagrin. Uh, and so I was born into like a very traditional home. The whole church thing, the whole God, guns, America, rah, 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 which is funny because that wasn't really a big thing because it was the 70s. But here we are, the whole country is now Tyler, Texas. Um,
Or, well, parts anyway.
Large swaths of at least the American South, and or I should say the United States South, because like there are other Americas besides this one. And like I just like, it feels even funny to say the United States now, like the states that are all under the flag. But like my parents have been married for 55 years. Like, I had no idea when I went out dating that it actually took some work, because my parents made it look like, oh, it's easy, which is kind of wrong because my uncle has been divorced 3 times. Blessed memory, John. But anyway, so they talked about being my parents' story. So my parents' story was awesome in that they met as being neighbors, and I was like, okay, that's great because I'm a little kid. And then I came to learn my mother was actually dating my dad's roommate. Later on, I found out like that was the story. And then like Ken goes back east because he was a Jersey boy, and then I guess apparently told dad to keep an eye on her. I don't know why this story comes out, but here it is. And apparently he did. So mom had been hanging out with Ken because she really liked dad. The kind of thing we think we know we want one thing, but we don't. And so like there's the outgrowth of that story that my parents get together. Poor Ken comes back. I'm not sure how the roommate worked that out because, again, I think there's some shame over that. So that story never really gets told, or I don't remember it because that was a little kid and I'm now 53 years old. But so I think there are a lot of times in our story where we think we want one thing, but we actually want this other thing. We're just hanging around so we could be around that guy. Like you ever had the friend group where that thing happens when you're young? I know I did. Maybe it's just because I heard that story my whole life. I think I want you, but I actually want you. I dated twins in high school. There's that part of my story. So there's that. And then there was like the religious part of my story that I could, and I honestly, this is truly the neurodivergence. I could feel that everybody's saying one thing, but then doing the other stuff. It was a very small town. And then I was like, yeah, y'all say this, but do you actually read the book? because I read the book, not to be, I'm like 7. So it's not like I'm this finger wagging little kid, but I'm like, I feel y'all. Again, it's the 70s. So people are acting. For those of you who don't know, the 70s are kind of a swingery time. And Tyler was a very wealthy small town. So people had the ability to say one thing and do another. And so it was also the beginning of the Satanic Panic. You know what that is? Yeah. So
man, that's a fun dive into.
For those of you who don't know what the Satanic Panic is, Satan was everywhere. He was going to get you with your music. He was going to get you through your TV shows, through cartoons, through everything. I didn't get to listen to the Beatles because apparently Ringo was so talented, he could turn me into a communist and a Satanist at the same time. And so I went to go see whatever that movie was that came out where that guy, everybody in the whole world got shocked by some sort of supernatural thing. And this one guy remembered the Beatles and he went all around the world playing Beatles music. And that was when I learned that Eleanor Rigby was a Beatles song because I'd only heard Aretha Franklin sing it. And my son was like, wait, what? You didn't know? So he's trying to find it on his phone so he can play the Beatles version for me. So I was like, it has real world consequences when your parents are afraid of Satan. And so I think this is where the start of shift, happens. Enough ragging on the church and Satan and my parents, because I love my parents. They've been together 55 years, and it gave me something to kind of rub against when I was a young person. And then I learned when I was 21, like they both did this. They both went as far away from their home as they could get. They went to California. So at 21, I did the same thing. Like, I'm getting out of here. And I love that they gave me that example. And my mother left because they were terrified she was going to marry a Yankee. So she goes, fine, I'm going to the West Coast. Dad's just like, it's cold in Pittsburgh, I'm leaving. I'm sure they both had better reasons, but again, those are the ones that gave me in childhood. And I did the same thing. I was like, I'm getting out of Texas. And married the first guy I ever found, but that's a different story. But it was because I was so programmed to get married because Jesus, and like that part of the program hung in there. But I think about all the stuff I did, even with that, like I still managed to find, because I married a Navy pilot. He was gone first 3 years of our marriage. He was gone 1.5 years of it. So I had to figure out how to do like for myself because my family was nowhere around. I had to figure out how to be independent and build a life alone. And like, I see like like talking back to my 21-year-old me, I'm like, good job, young Sam. You were recovering from a lot of stuff. And I still like, all right, what would 21-year-old Sam do? Because I was like recovering from that debutante mentality because she was kind of a dick. And talk about a lot of white entitlement and trauma. That's a story for another day. And and trying to build a life with just chronic illness and in a culture that's very different, but also like all those things are opportunity. It sounds so just cliche, but it's like I was able, because I had excellent community support for all the issues around the military and what they pay them and all that kind of stuff. There is excellent opportunity if you're able to utilize it, like built-in support, because you have wives that are also around there that are also going through similar things. You have like hierarchy where the older wives come back and say, you need to do this because I've been where you are. And if you're smart enough, I was actually just so dumb that they kind of came along and went, here, we see you struggling horrifically. Let us help you. And because I was so exhausted, I didn't really have the opportunity to say, sure, let me receive help, because I didn't know that was something you could do. I just had to take it. And I knew just facets of myself started to kind of blossom. And I see that all over the parts of the world where women have to do things as single parents. And you see a lot of times, I didn't have kids yet, but where I start to see the issues come up when the men come back and women have made things of themselves in their absence. And then the men come back and they want everything to be exactly the way they were when they left. And they're like, no, stop. And it's a good thing the men go back to the boat again. So there's this like ebb and flow.
But listen, the number of career military folks that I know who ended up divorced after they retired is high.
Yeah. My first husband, when he was in the military for, I think, active for like, I think 10 years. And when he got out, like our friends were laying bets, like, okay, how many years after do you think it's going to be? And it was, I think maybe 4. They were not easy years because he transitioned to the airlines, and they kept him going a lot because he was always on the road. But like the minute he moved home and had like a job where he was in the house all the time, not long. And yeah, and I think there are a lot bigger issues than him just being home all the time. But and I think there are a lot of ways to digress on that one. But I think when you marry somebody who's doing one thing and is joyfully happy in that position, and then they switch to do something that is a very different idea than what they thought it would be, that puts very big. Also, it was after 9/11. There's a huge stressor there that was right in the middle of all that, that put huge stresses on both of us. But yeah, there's a whole other show. But
yeah, that is, because that was 3 days after the birth of my first child at the beginning of my marriage. And let me tell you, it's amazing I survived that. Yeah. So we get these stories, and for the first 20 years of our life, this is what we have to work with. This is the material that we are given. We do not have a whole lot of control over shaping or outcome. When and how does that change, and how do we make the most of it?
Let's see. First 20 years, yeah, we're handed, and we get them from many places. We don't just get them from our family. We get them from our culture. Like, it's the double dose of, and I think there's this bit of like discernment, like what is useful for me? Like I said, when we first started off, like I was the why kid. Like, excuse me, why am I doing this? And I think that
to be an autistic woman.
Pardon me, sir. I still, but and I do this like to the day, like clarity, please. Like somebody will send out a group email. I had one over the weekend. Like I go to the meetings early for everything. Like, okay, I know you said it like this, and I'm sure the rest, not everybody in the community, but I know like to group speak, it means this. I'm leading this meeting. What do you want that to look like? And they're like, okay, Samantha. And I feel that way. That's like my internalized feeling of having been this way for over 50 years. But I don't think that's just something I impute on myself. But I think it's not a bad thing to always be looking for clarity, to be curious about, how could I do this differently? Like these instructions have been handed to me, but what if I did it like this? Or where's another way to, like, I'm the weirdo that people are always lost in my hometown when they go there with me because I never drive the same way twice. I was like, oh, that red light's really long. Let's go this way. And so my husband's always getting lost. He's like, can you just go the same way 2 times so I know where we're staying? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was like, I've done this for 50 years and it's boring, but okay, I will go there the same way so you can find where our apartment is. And but I realized that because the landmarks all look the same, but it's just a bunch of strip malls, so it doesn't look the same way to him. Because as the town's expanded, the charming downtown looks the same, but like as it builds out, it just looks like a bunch of stuff that looks the same. So that's not easy to remember. When I see the things that look identical to the way they looked when I was in high school, it doesn't look that way to other people that have not experienced it and have heavy, heavy emotional feelings about it. And so to take the stories that have been given to us and then ask questions about it. Like, I think about this, like Jewish people sit around and look at Torah like weekly and go, what are new questions? What are, what about this? What are new ways to, I think to to bring new life into old ideas. You can bring new life into the story that you've been given. Like, why I see it worked for my parents' generation that way, or it worked for my grandparents, but that story doesn't serve me, because heck, month after month we get new technology, new ideas. Or why do we put Elon Musk on a pedestal? I don't think he deserves to be there. Why do we let billionaires rule the world? What have they really done to serve anybody? It's like Bezos had a good idea, but now he's just hoarding money. Like, it's not even personal now. It gets to be cultural. And how do we undo and take our culture back from people that are just hoarding all the money? Like, they call it a hoard because back in the olden times, kings had a hoard for all the money. Like, how do we the people take a culture back, rather than just sit around and go, oh yeah, because it's always been this way? Okay, not really, because nobody's ever experienced this thing like we're experiencing now. And how do we do that when we've got a bunch of people that are tired, scared, and living in times that are, quite frankly, terrifying? When you look outside, and I'm here in South Texas, and the heat's killing people. And
right. We talked about the weather.
we were talking about
your weather.
And we've gotten to the point where talking about the weather used to be something that was like trite and trivial. Now it's important, and the weather's deadly outside. It's now an issue. And like, I never used to like to talk about the weather because I always felt like it was just something to appease people. I was like, now when you talk about the weather, it can start fist fights. And so I was like, where, changing your story, and I think it's a decision, it's discernment and a decision to do something different. And I used to have a Post-it. I used to have a lot more Post-its, but I used to have a Post-it over my desk in my old house that said, do something different, because I was in a marriage that was not killing me. I've been in one of those, but that was slowly suffocating. And I looked up at it one day, like, what would be different? And I left him a note, and I went out to a drum circle. I mean, I'm just giving a trail, like an easy type of thing, but just like put energy in a different direction. Like, I started back, I did a yoga training, got the certification, and then my mother's dementia got worse. So I spent a lot of time then not focusing on teaching, but a lot of time, my yoga for that year then was helping my parents. Like, my yoga was nowhere near a mat. And I finally, after I kind of got them moved out of the house, I was like, physically, after I got my shoulder fixed, a bunch of stuff happened, decided I need to get back on a mat because my hips are tight. I did 3 classes in the last week. I was like, oh yeah, not teaching, but from a student perspective. And I was just like, I've forgotten how good this feels. My body was like just grateful. I was like, and it wasn't like 75. It was like a 30-minute class, but to just lay on the floor and breathe without, for myself, and do something like just kind to myself. I'd forgotten what it was like to do something kind for my body. And because most of my life, any activity I did was like a way of berating my body. So to just do something kind, like I'm going to go out and walk 45 miles, so to do something just out of kindness, like, oh yeah, I forgot how good this feels. And then like the next class I was doing like a lunge. I was like, and I was very out of balance because I hadn't done it in a year. And to be able to just go, oh, I probably should do this again. And to realize the difference, like taking that year off, I came back a kinder person to myself, because I had lost that part of me that was cruel, that felt that every time I moved, it had to be punishment. Now, I don't know exactly what I did in that year, but maybe
But
it's
some of this is cultural. This is not you. And this is the story, because
this is
if
a story.
we are overwhelmed, and if we are incapable of caring for ourselves, then we're not rebelling.
And part of it too was I in my yoga training, we spent a lot of time learning how to decolonize the view of the story of only a white thin body is beautiful. Only a thin person who sits, like that story that I was taught so well at home. In the culture of my childhood, I was taught, hey, you really believe this? Do you really believe only this is beautiful? Like if you went to a vet and said, nope, only the greyhound is a cute dog. Is that something you actually believe? Or is this something you were taught and you can unlearn it? So like having that like actually run through my head, and then having time to go, whenever a thought like that would pop up, go, oh yeah, I don't actually believe that. I can just, move because my body likes movement, and like have it actually then live there versus something I have to actively unlearn. That's the nice thing about any story. If a story becomes something that lives in your brain, you can unlearn the story. It's like, oh, it's kind of like, I live with cats. Cats seem to be autistic people and cats.
I have cats.
I have cats too.
Hot summer jam. So
I'm still waiting for the meditation version.
oh, well, we're having problems with Spotify because the US Spotify thinks that it's a spoken word hit piece and not a dance hit. I'm
man.
Clearly. So yeah, we're
Dance
working on it.
Okay.
And I think that there's something here about the way in which we get to recraft what it is that matters to us. So what's that look like?
Recrafting. I think it looks different in a lot of ways to what your story, like whatever your story looks like. So I feel like I'm dancing around here. I've got cats stuck in my head, so I'm sorry. Cats. Also, I've got this hyper awareness of like what I look like on Zoom, and I'm just like, okay, throw it out of your head. And there's a story right there. What I look like on Zoom is wrong. We'll start with that, because when I first saw this 2 weeks ago, I went, whoa, yeah, okay, that's a perfect. We'll use that example. I saw it and I was like, oh my god, that's horrifying. There's the story. That is horrifying. I look horrifying on Zoom. I'm gonna have to like train myself in front of a mirror like Steve Martin. And then that was what I thought on Friday. No, that's what I thought on Thursday when I saw it. And then I went Thursday night and watched a jazz group perform. Those guys are in a zone. If you've ever watched jazz players perform, they make the weirdest faces you've ever seen. I was like, and people pay great money to go watch jazz musicians make weird faces. And like the more they're into it, the weirder they look. And everybody's like, so there's your story. It's like, that's just my jam. I have a weird face when I'm very excited, and I'm just going to own that. And then it was, I guess I was at Temple leading a meeting. This one woman was like, we need to make sure that this person is well-trained. And when they're on Zoom, they have a professional presentation. And I'm like, do I really want somebody with a professional presentation, or do I want somebody who's very good at what they do? Now, perhaps they can be the same thing, or do I want them to look lifeless and they just, I don't know. But maybe they can be both. But as someone who typically looks like a Fraggle, I don't really.
Who defines professional?
Right.
What does that mean? And does that apply to me? Often it does not.
I was like, there's a reason I work for myself. Because and in many examples, it was like on screen, I'm the first one to go, okay. Bernie. He looks like he's about to take off. And I love that about him. So and I think it can start to look sterile and not inviting if and it was like in that whole aspect of it, they need to look professional. Also, directly was in opposition to every other aspect that they wanted this person to look like in the search criteria that we had. And so I'm like, okay, note to self, if you look like this and you're all hemmed in on Zoom, then you don't look engaging and excited and happy to be there in all the other aspects that were also like being looked for. So I found that to be a very interesting contrast.
And that's true, I think, for a lot of us in how it plays out. Our standards are so different,
Mm-hmm.
even within the same realm of cultural training.
Mm-hmm.
that it becomes a necessity to constantly re-examine this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like if you have a story you want to change, then first, is it true? Like, is this true? Is it necessary? Like, is this something that really is in my life that's actively affecting my life? Like me living the life of under the spell of the colonized white thin body type, that was actively affecting my life. So yes, changing that story actively made my life better. But having being a Fraggle on Zoom calls really is just me being who I am.
Lacey says you don't look like a Fraggle. Just wanted you to know that.
Thank you. I've come a long way since the very first Zoom. When I first got on Zoom, first started however many years ago, I was so horrified about being on a camera. I would just get on the phone. Like, I can't even figure out how to. I was so afraid of the tech. I'm going to break my camera. Yeah. So it's come a long way. And it was also in like bigger rooms. I think there were a few people like, all right, the woman who's waving her hands around. So it's been something that I've kind of learned that I have to just be myself. And but yeah, I think first diving into the story that you want to change, like why are you finding your motivations? Why are you changing it? Is it actively something that is necessary to change? Are you moving yourself forward by what is the new story you want to step into? Is I think the big one. Like where are you going with the new story? And like where, yeah, because I'm one of those people that's like, what's your 5-year plan? I don't know. People ask me that, I'm like, 5 years? I'm happy 5 weeks from now. And I think a lot of that is very much not so much the autistic bit, it's the complex trauma stuff from my childhood that I learned how to kind of put those bins in the different bins from my youth. Like, oh, that's because we would get excited about, oh, we're going on a trip. And just as we would walk out the door, somebody would do a golf swing in the living room, throw their back out. So much for that trip. And that's not, oh, yes, high privilege. Yes, I see that. But that happens enough in your childhood, and you just quit looking forward to stuff. And so I was like, oh, all right, I guess I'll go to my room and color. And so I was like, I literally just thought about that. How I can remember when I got engaged the first time, like, I've got to get married really fast so that something bad doesn't happen between now and when we get married. And so like that whole thing about not having forward-making plans was something that like deeply affected me until, I guess, till right now. Yeah, I just kind of like plan, like, it's more like a survival piece where I am like thinking about the fact that it is something that it is an edge that I work on right now. And knowing that that's a story that is still very alive in my body.
And I think that when it is so vividly visceral in your system, it's a difficult thing to work with. You have to really consciously choose to handle this material, right?
Absolutely. And I think, when you realize that all of us just came out of a very highly charged pandemic, and being on lockdown, being separated, all this kind of stuff that, if you think about it, when we had patient zero, if they'd have just been like, you know what, all the world join together, kumbaya, let's lock down for 2 weeks. It's going to suck, but let's do this. Perhaps that would have just ended it. And we don't know, but perhaps. And people are people. The whole world's never going to ever agree on anything. But the Pollyanna in me is like, thinks about what would that have been like? And where would our nervous systems all be today if we'd have done that? But would we be very different people because we didn't live through that? And are we very different? How can we be very different people for having lived through something? Like all of my grandparents lived through the pandemic of 1917. None of them talked about it. None of them. And So I wonder, I was like, to just leave, because, and they also lived through the depression. They all talked about that. None of them talked about the pandemic. So, you know, I think about the fact that I think it leaves a bigger mark on us, a trauma that we've all lived through. And I think when this rolls out a little bit further, we'll know more about what it really did to us collectively. Forget about the other traumas that anybody's lived through, because I have friends like, oh, that wasn't a trauma. I'm like, yeah, they shut the flipping word down.
Beg to differ as the mother of, so he's 6 now.
Oh, wow.
And was turning 3 in April of 2020.
Wow.
And we weren't able to get his diagnosis because early intervention was happening over Zoom. And
oh, wow.
How do I get a 3-year-old autistic boy to have a conversation with somebody on Zoom? It's not going to happen.
Mm-mm.
And he spent 2 years inside without much exposure to other people.
Oh,
I think a lot about the fact that at this age, my daughter was starting to talk and starting to really progress. And the things that he didn't get to do between 3 and 5, because we were all indoors, cannot be understated for his development for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Briar. Wow.
So I think that we deeply underestimate the ways in which the collective story has impact on different people, and the ways that we have to kind of tell that story over and over and over again. So how do we, as a person who appreciates story, right? I like hearing other people's stories. I recognize, though, that that is somewhat unique, and most people really don't want to hear it. How do we start making telling our stories to each other an easier thing to do?
You know, I think, you know, like just when you told me that little bit about your son being 3, when the pandemic, when the lockdowns all started, like that, immediately my heart just went, wow, I want to know more about that. I want to hear more about your story. And I think you've got a sweet summation. You've got like deep impact about how, oh, wow. Like you draw me in to a deep, real truth about you, your child, and a lifelong matter now, and what is very real for you. My husband and I got married during the pandemic. Like our anniversary is in, like, let's see, what is it, the 12th? It's in about a week. And so, because people are like, wait, I've never heard you say husband without X in front of it. You did what? And so what happened?
So no one came, is what you're telling.
No, it was it was pandemic. Like we were trying to, you know, he's got 3 kids. We're essentially the Bradys. So we were trying to coordinate all this. And one day he was like, we were sitting in the breakfast nook drinking coffee, and he goes, what are you doing this afternoon? I was like, are you kidding me? I'm not doing anything this afternoon. Because I was wondering if he had like a Zoom meeting or something. I was like, no. He goes, I'm going to come by here after lunch. We'll just go down to the courthouse. So we did. And at this point, I had 2 of my kids staying here with us because I just wanted to break from Washington State. Like, oh, please come down here. I'm like, this is the worst place to come. They're like, well, we can't go outside anyway, so why not be in Texas? Fair point. So we'd gotten our wedding license, whatever we call it. And so we walk over to, like, I'm walking now. I do feel like a fraggle. So we walked down into the same courthouse that I'd gotten my divorce a few years ago. And we walk into the place because all the signage is huge because they don't want anyone, you know, got our mask on. They don't want anyone like running into other people. And we go through the metal detector. Like, this is the most unromantic wedding ever. So So we've got our mask on and our thing. So he's carrying the license, like, and so this guy comes up like he's a game show host, like, "Are you two about to get married?" And we're like, "How'd you know?" And he goes, "Do you want to get married inside or out?" And I'm like, "We can get married in front of the fountain." No, it's like one of the hottest days of the year, and we're standing out there. We could take our mask off because obviously we're living in the same house. He stands about like 6 feet away and is like doing our vows. We're both dripping sweat. Like we're whores in church. He's like, "Where's your rings?" I was like, "Oh, we forgot those." And he was like, "Here." So he loans us his. I was like, "This is feels like it's an omen that we're having to borrow someone else's ring." And so we say, we do all the paperwork. We get back to the house, and we're gone about an hour. And we get back, and the kids are mad because we got married and we didn't tell them. I go, "Well, that's eloping, right? If we told you, it wouldn't be the same." So they said, "Well, you've got to now call your parents and tell them." I'm like, they don't care. They're like, "They're probably going to care." Well, so that was my pandemic wedding story. And so everybody's like, "Were you going to get married again?" I'm like, "I'm pretty sure it took. Like, we've done all the paperwork. I don't feel the need. Like, we both had, between the two of us, we've had 7 weddings now. I don't think we need to have 8.
See, and there's something about that that's so tragic to me. Like the party that I was also, in 2020, we were supposed to be renewing our vows. That certainly did not happen.
Well, no, that's sad to me when you don't get to do those kind of things.
We are going to do it now in 2025, or maybe next, I think 25, because it falls on a Saturday. It'll be great.
Yep.
But, it's these kinds of things. And when we miss out on sharing our stories with each other, there's a lack of humanization.
Absolutely. Like I turned 50 in 2020, and it was like a Labor Day. It wasn't quite a Labor Day, but it was going to like have a Labor Day weekend. Woohoo, 50 years, half a century of Sam. It's, I was like, okay, it'll be fine. It'll be over by September. It was not over by September. And so, yeah, like you're exactly right. Like I never want to throw a party for myself for anything. The idea that even crossed my mind. And my father was hilarious. He's like, "Yeah, you could throw a party where you don't get married at the end of it. That would be awesome. Be like the first time ever." I was like, "Yeah, because I already am." And so, yeah, you're exactly right. When we can't have those celebrations, like for how many times in humanity we get together usually, and now that we've gone through something like this, to celebrate the fact we're still here. And they haven't gotten us yet, whatever that day is.
I was discussing with someone yesterday that one of the things that's missing in the corporate hierarchical structure is the storyteller. That there's no one in most businesses who is responsible for remembering where we've been and helping to direct where we're going in the future. Because everything about business, especially in North America, is now, it's shareholders, it's what can we produce. And so there's no legacy or anything that grows or progresses long term. I think this is one of the biggest flaws I see in how we're having a conversation now. Nothing is long term or built to last. It's all 30 seconds. It's all short term. It's all ephemeral. How do we deliberately build in the deeper stories into our lives?
It's interesting you say that about everything is short term. I can remember going to my grandmother's house in the aughts. She still had appliances that had like the cloth wrapping on them. Like she didn't throw stuff away because it still worked. Like, why do I need a new one, Samantha? This one works just fine. And I'm like the metal fans with that. And they did. She took immaculate care of everything. And so the shit she had from like the 60s still worked. And I was like, wow, you can't even buy those kind of things now. Like everything is meant to it's like if they ever drop an EMP anywhere, I was headed to Graham's house because all that shit's still gonna work. There's not a chip in anything. It has nothing to do with how stories work, but it just made me think about, other than that was a story, culturally, like we've all become goldfish. Our brains, everything, do not have the ability to hold on to long stories anymore. I mean, that can be learned. I think this makes me sound conspiratorial, but it's like the ability to sit through long things with focus and like not doing two things at once, like watching a movie and not having a phone in your hand. Like it's
Guilty. So guilty.
I purposefully make myself put my phone in the other room so that I don't do that, because it's like it's almost like doing yoga for me. It's like, how do I do this where I keep my focus on one thing? And it's hard. It's not hard. It's a skill. It's a practice to keep your attention on one thing, because we have been so inundated with just material. And I believe it's totally purposeful so that we lose the ability to stay focused in one direction and think that we need to be knowing where our attention, because attention is currency, which is why I think they keep our attention, who are our billionaire overlords, keep our attention in so many different places, that if we ever could keep it focused, where we're then more focused on each other as a community and in our culture, the culture that we can create as our fellow humans versus on consuming more shit, we would then go, y'all are stupid. This is where the real currency is in our stories and in each other. And if we had storytellers, they would be like, these guys are dumb. I think that's why they're the magic dust of the giant corporations is they don't want us remembering, because then we remember there were times when we actually knew things that were useful, and like how to go out and create meaning in our lives other than sitting around and buying, other than it's Prime Day, go buy some more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wait, it is Prime Day, but I don't need any of this stuff. One of the upsides of decluttering a parent's home is you're like, I don't need anything.
Can I get fewer stuffs, please? Yeah. Thank you.
Can I get a declutter monkey? Do you have one of those? Because that's what I really need, is less of your stuff. I mean, because they've been advertising, and I think that's the story is, please buy our stuff. Please buy our stuff. And like, no, I need less. I need someone to come take away some of my stuff, because I bought into that too for years. I was like, oh, I bought into it, and now I don't, because it still tickles really badly. And I still have too much crap in my house. Because it's such an itch, and it scratches, like it tickles a lot.
Even when I'm filling it with stories, because let me tell you how many bookcases I have full of stories. I collect them.
I do too.
Like a crow with shiny things.
Yeah, same.
Which is not the same as consuming them and incorporating them into my life.
Yeah, there is into the body, where then they become knowledge. It's like, consuming, digesting, and then integrating it, and then it becomes wisdom that you push out into the world, versus just hoarding it. And I think about like a dragon's hoard, or the king's hoard, where then it's not useful. It just sits in one place and it's not available to the community. Much like Jeff Bezos, but I promise I'm not going to shit on Amazon anymore.
But there's something there, right? That what we're missing when it comes to building the long-term together is an overwhelm from consumer culture,
right?
And needing to have more things so that we're not talking to each other. And that's cyclical. It just continues.
Well, I mean, I think like there's a big difference between like commerce culture, where like, oh, I need to go get some, grain for my animals, and I need some this, where you have like, there's commerce, and then there's like capitalism, where you have Fincher and you have this and you have all this other stuff that started off as a great idea. I never have to have things in my warehouse. I never have to have this. This is great. And then it just became like a dragon eating the planet. I'm thinking for dragons today. I don't know where that came from. Apparently I'm feeling mystical. But I think we're using now the resource, we're treating these resources on a finite planet as if they're infinite, and that we can just keep buying our way into the future. But I think what we're starting to see with some of these supply chain stuff is that they're not. And like going back to our weather issue earlier, it's like it's now we're paying that piper. And how do we put that genie back in the bottle? I don't know. This is not necessarily the story that I think some people tell, is that, well, we can just keep doing this forever. We'll just go dig up the rainforest. So like, I don't know if that's the story I want to run with, but perhaps we find some, new ways to do old things, because there are some really, really smart people on the planet doing cool stuff. And there's some really, other stories that don't get listened to because people really don't want to hear it. Like all the stuff going on in France, like there's a whole lot of story that's a whole show in itself. But I think, as a species, we have great ability to overcome mighty things with like visions and great stories. And then we're cruel and deplorable at the same time. Like that's the great paradox of humanity, right? Is we have this ability to rise to great heights and to sink to horrific lows. And which angel of our nature do we follow, and how do we inspire and then hold the paradox of that to know that I have this capacity and this one in me, and sometimes I'm going to need to use both of them.
So that brings us very tidily full circle. How do we find those stories in ourselves? What we started with, what the base kind of cultural story that we were given, how do we start pulling those out in a way that we can meaningfully interact with them?
For me, like I write a lot. Like when I left my last divorce, when I left, when I moved out, I took like a bag of journals, because I've had my journals, journal pages way out of context used in a divorce court. It's like when I moved out, I had like a duffel bag full of journals. I was like, okay, I don't know what this goober head will do. Fortunately, he was lazy and wouldn't do anything, but they meant that much to me. Like they were my thoughts. They were all of my things. I was like, sometimes just take some time and scratch around what's in your head. You'll surprise yourself. It doesn't have to just write nonsense, write poetry, right? Just whatever, sit on a porch. I used to love to sit in coffee houses or bars or anywhere where there are people and make up dialogue between two people that are sitting there. Like that was my favorite thing to do. I'm still like getting around, still learning how to people again. So it's kind of fun to go and do. But when I was single and I had a whole lot more like alone time, it was my favorite thing to do in the evening, was to go sit around, drink something and make up dialogue between all the other people in the place. I would do that at airports when I flew a lot. And it's a great way to just entertain yourself and to see what's moving around in your own head, because what you're making people say is what's crawling around inside your brain.
Yeah, and there's a freedom there, right? Because that doesn't actually belong to you. That belongs to these other people. I think there is, if writing is not your bag, I deeply encourage people to explore improv in some way.
Oh,
you can physically move all of these stories out of your body when you're on a stage trying to make shit up. Trust me, these stories will come.
Oh yeah, I love improv. That's a fun. That's always a fun way to move some stuff up, and you'll open your mouth and words will come out that you're like, I didn't know that was living in there. Or even movement. Make a playlist. Throw something on and just move your body and see. That's another fun one. I would back when I was doing a lot of movement teaching, we would move around, like put a playlist on and then write what came after. And another really surprising thing about what's living inside you, either through movement or through words, or make a date with a friend and y'all share stories with each other. I mean, it's kind of like, this is very liberating, getting to share stories with Briar. And so sometimes having a buddy that you get to share stuff with is very useful, because we spend a lot of time in isolation in this culture, much more than we do in others. And so like having somebody that you're willing to share your heart with is a really good thing.
And I deeply encourage people to explore therapy if that's what they feel like they need to get
Absolutely.
to these depths of story. But it doesn't have to be that hard. It can absolutely be a joyful act. And I think the more time we spend cultivating the art of it, the easier it becomes to not just move through it, but also let it go.
Oh yeah, I've gotten to the place now, like, because I moved stories for 30 years with my body, that I'll feel something will come up physically when I'm moving, like feelings and sensations in my body. I'll know to deal with what they are. I'll just know that after that dance class, they'll be gone. And I almost prefer that now, because it's like some sensations are rising when I'm on the dance floor, and then I don't go, oh, this must be about that time in third grade when Steve Dyer hit me. And as long as I don't stick a story to the sensation arising in my body, it'll just move. But if I sit and kind of chew on it, or sometimes maybe that's what you need to do, but for the most part, if I just let it come up, it exits. But if you're Steve Dyer and you need to work on that, then but it's yeah, so it's like it's one of those things. I think it's very intuitive. Like I think a lot of this comes because I've got more now trained psychiatrists from sitting on this side of the couch, that where it's one of those, it starts to be like, oh, I need to dive deeper and talk with someone about this who has letters after their name, or I need to just go and talk with a friend, or I need to, you start to get to where you feel there's more thread to pull with this versus, oh, I just need to maybe go take a nap. I mean, like your body starts to be, it's like Martha Graham says, the body doesn't lie. And if you really get to where you kind of let the monkey mind go, oh, let me be quiet for a minute and just feel what the body's story is. And you go, oh, okay, I think I'm just tired. Maybe I'm hungry. And as an autistic person, sometimes that's a news flash. Like, oh, have I eaten today? I have not. And so like that was something I had to really train myself. Like, oh, I probably should go have a snack right now. Or maybe I should go find something that at least sounds good because I don't feel hungry. And so, yeah, there's just a lot that, like the story that, oh, I don't need food right now. And that's a story that I think being just female bodied in the world, particularly if you live in the US, it's like, oh, you don't need to eat, you're fine. Which is a ridiculous story, and one that's but I think it's yeah.
And one we're going to unpack 2 weeks from now, because that reparenting piece is absolutely vital to working with our story and how we move forward in the world. So you wanted to talk about telling the story to your younger self, and there's so much interplay there, right? How do we talk to our inner child? How do we have conversations with ourselves? How do we forgive ourselves? There's a lot here to move through.
Well, there is. I mean, like for me, it's even recognizing, like, because when I was a young person, I idolized I think we all do. Like they're gods. I mean, like they're huge people. Even if your parents did a less than stellar job, and I give my parents, like, they did the best they could do, and I love my parents very much. But like you look at them, and it's just like, what? Because you're a tiny little person, and they're big, and even if they're doing everything wrong, and I'm not saying mine, I'm just saying it, even if they do, if that's a situation you found yourself in. They're these huge people, and as a tiny person, you're dependent on them for everything, right? Either your food, your shelter, your medical care, everything. And like this kind of hit me recently, and it was kind of like, wow, because when I was in treatment, because I had migraines, so I was like they were trying to figure out what was going on with me, so they were taking me. So I had medical trauma we want to talk about, but so they were doing their best because they were also afraid. And I finally hit me though as an adult. I was like, oh my God, that's it. They were terrified. They were doing their level best because they were parenting from a place of fear and from guilt, which if you've ever been a parent and you've been to those places mentally, you're doing like what feels like your best. It's terrifying sometimes to the child because what the energetic you emit is also fear and guilt. Like I was doing this to my cat the other day and the cat was like, Meow. But the cat can at least fight.
Such good mirrors for our souls, aren't they?
Oh my God! Oh my God! I don't know. Oh my God! My cat, she just looks at me like, "What's wrong with you?" I was like, "Oh, thank you." I'm an erotic bitch. Sorry. But then I was thinking at 16 when they're like, "Well, it's your parents. This is coming from your relationship with your parents." And I can remember like walking across the group, and I was about ready to slap the woman. Like, my parents are perfect. Because this is what my mother would say about hers. And I'm like, oh. And so like going back as an adult going, your parents are not perfect. You watched your mom fight with her mom all the time. I was like, you needed them to be perfect because you were helpless. And it's like, they did their best. They weren't, and you're still here. And that's, like, and right now that little one that lives inside you has you, and you're definitely not perfect. But you get it because you are you. You've done a lot of work to get past what you lived in. And so it's like, it's that taking the acknowledgement of what you lived through. Like, yes, from the outside, it probably, because, I never had to worry about like where my food was coming from and all this. And so it's like, the traumas that I dealt with were different from other people's kind of traumas. But it's like I was the first kid born after like 5 miscarriages, which no one ever talked about, like that kind of trauma. Right. Because my mom's like, oh, it's just something that happens. I'm like, no, it's not. So like she was dealing with a kind of trauma that was invisible, but it certainly emotionally came out. And so, so like there's where all the medical trauma and the terrible visible fear that I felt, but I couldn't name. And so like going back and going, okay, you lived with a lot, a lot that no one knew how to even speak to. And then of course, like all the emotional stuff of being autistic in a town that no one even knew what to talk about that. Of course, my mother's autistic as all get out. And all we knew is that she was the really smart one who didn't like food.
I'm constantly struck after my own diagnosis is re-examining my own parents, my grandparents, like, oh, wow, look at all of this neurodivergence everywhere that we just didn't acknowledge or talk about. And that's why this is such an important part of the process.
Right.
Because we have to know our own stories and we have to be able to heal with them.
Right. Like my family, like it's like, why were we the ones that could never get anything organized? Like our offices always looked like the trash dump. I was like, oh, that's why neurodivergence is a thing.
Right.
I was like, we were the family that everybody had migraines. Everybody had, food stuff. Nobody's house. Like if we didn't have someone come and keep our house, we wouldn't have been able to find anything. And it was like, oh, because we were the neurodivergent family.
So 2 weeks, y'all.
Yeah.
It's gonna be an amazing time. Sam, this was delightful. Thank you. I always appreciate being trusted with your stories and with everyone who comes and sits in this space. There is healing here. It's circular. It takes time to integrate into your body. And this is how we do the work. So if you have not subscribed to the Neurodiversity Media Network, please do that. It's neurodiversitymedianetwork.com. We'll make sure that you get sent the next episode directly via email. This is how you stay in the loop. And we will be back in 2 weeks for some inner child healing. Come on. It's going to be a great time. Fantastic.
More on the house that neurodiversity built.
Ooh, thank you for being here, y'all. Sam, thank you. And we will see you all again